away from what could be considered something closer to straight, real world, documentary, whatever you want to call it, photography, and into studio-based still lifes and monoprints and all kinds of other things. I enjoy that. I enjoy that very much. It keeps things interesting. And yes, I collect things. I mean, photography is collecting in many ways. And I take things home. I take things into the studio. I have made still lifes. And I also, taking it a bit further, I've made a lot of pictures that appear to have been made in the store, but in fact were made in my studio. And so, don't ask me why, but I guess it's a way of playing with fact and fiction, and it's really a means to creating images or telling a story or creating a world. Is what I'm striving to do inside the book. And so very early on, I had some initial photographs of the store, and I couldn't always be in Mississippi. So I called on a friend who is a scenographer or a scenic painter or faux finisher who works in the theater business in New York City, and I asked them to help me to create walls and shelves and surfaces that could essentially recreate the store in my studio on a very small scale. And that enabled me to continue to make pictures and essentially be in that world anytime that I like. And that actually turned out to be a huge advantage during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's fascinating actually in how many of these talks we are seeing projects that have been shaped by the pandemic, you know, by that strange moment that stopped so many photographers from being able to work in the way that they used to.
I think we're also in an interesting moment right now where projects aren't necessarily, they're not just relating back to the pandemic, but they've been, even the timing of what's coming out into the world right now has been affected by the pandemic. And the talk amongst with my friends has just been, wow, what a year. 2024 is really quite a big year for photography books.
Absolutely. There is another striking aspect to the book that those of you who have it in their hands will have noticed, which is every book collector's nightmare, which is that the edges of the pages appear to have been eaten away by foxing or mold. There are blemishes on the pages. You know, the book essentially appears to have been taken off a shelf in Gongko. But I would imagine that that is not the case, and that this is a kind of staged version of this wear. Yeah, when did this idea in the book process? When did this idea come in?
I don't know. I can't really pinpoint that, but it's not the first time I've done something like that. My prior book, Bottom of the Lake, also included some printed effects that lent a sense of age and time to the book. But yes, I did want the book to look and feel as much as possible as if it had come from a damp shelf in the store, or it somehow soaked in a bit of that southern humidity.
Yeah, and
I love the fact that the book looks the way that it does, and someone will pick it up and actually think that it's a bad copy.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also that the subtlety of it, in the sense that we're not quite sure at times. You know, the marks are almost difficult to make out. So.
Yeah, and you did mention that there's a text element to the book, and looking up here at the screen, or even having the book in your hand, you might be considering the mono prints, which are very big and bold and readily apparent. But the text, I think the text that you're referring to is a very lightly printed, penciled marginalia is what I refer to it as. There are a few instances at one at the very beginning and then one at the very end that are more easily seen, but I think a lot of photographers struggle with the element of text and how to use it, and this was in part my way of having it and not having it at the same time. And you have to look at the book very carefully, or even see it sometimes in just the right light in order for that text to reveal itself. I love the idea of giving the viewer something new to discover in continued viewing of the work.
And I mean, in many ways, I guess this project, even though, as you've said, it is a very specific location, that you kept returning to. You didn't find other examples of this type of place, but it was this one place. It speaks to a much larger phenomenon that could happen all across America or even the world, I guess. But one thing I found myself wondering, looking at the book, was about the family behind this store. And they don't appear in any way in the book. But can you tell us something about them?
Yeah, at one time, I believe me, I consider all the angles, and at one time I had thought about making that part of the situation, or that story, a part of the work, or a thread in the work. It just didn't end up going that way, but it is a very fascinating American story. It's a Chinese-American-owned store. The Chinese first began arriving in America in the mid-1800s and worked on a number of very large and important development projects. First and foremost, the Transcontinental Railroad. They settled in San Francisco and other parts of the West Coast. And then came the American Civil War, which resulted in black Americans being given some freedom and suddenly being referred to as free men, which of course they weren't, but and being able to leave the cotton plantations that they had been slaving on for years. And suddenly the white plantation owners, the landowners, suddenly found themselves in dire need of cheap labor. And so they turned to the male Chinese laborers and basically recruited them and lured them into moving to Mississippi. And of course, they weren't happy with that horrible, back-breaking, low-paying life either. And there was an extremely restrictive and race-based law, a federal law in place in America at the time. And the name says it all. It was the Chinese Exclusion Act. And it severely limited the number of Chinese people who could come into the country, and also severely restricted what they could do. But they were allowed to be merchants, and they began leaving the plantations and opening up grocery stores. And at one time, there were hundreds of these stores dotting the Delta landscape. A few of them remain, but this is the only one that I had seen that had this time capsule-like quality. Moving away a bit from the Chinese-American story, just to America in general, I think this work is a bit, in part, it's a reflection on 20th century America. This commercial environment, all the products inside, left behind, rotting, what we left behind. And of course, there have been changes to the retail landscape over time as well. And these small mom and pop shops are slowly dying and disappearing.
That's all the time I have to ask questions, but we do have time for a question from the audience for Christian about the project. Okay, well, in that case, I will take the privilege of asking you one more question. I guess, it's not entirely clear if the book is chronological in its sequence. You know, you've mentioned that it's over a 20-year period, and you mentioned that the store is, you know, closed and shuttered. But I was just curious to know what this place is now. Is there anything left? Has it been knocked down? Does it still stand? Like, what is Gonko today?
The buildings still exist, but they've been completely gutted. And I saw the store for the last time on the day before that happened, just a few months before the pandemic began, which seemed oddly fitting in a way. What's inside, I don't know.
Okay. Well, maybe a subsequent book we might find out. So Christian is going to be signing copies of Gonko tomorrow at 3 p.m. on the TBW Books booth L08. And you can also see prints from the series at Robert Morat's booth, which is C47.
We've also just added a second signing at Edition Image Vevey on Sunday at 2, I want to say.
Okay. So you'll have several other opportunities.
If there are copies left. They didn't have many.
Right. Or at least you'll be able to continue the conversation with Christian. Please make sure he gets his book back before he leaves us.
My only copy.
Thank you so much.